We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome to Conspiracy Corner Podcast, everyone. This is Abe, your host. It is Christmas Day. Merry Christmas, everyone. I hope you all are having an awesome Christmas. I was actually supposed to work tonight. I'm supposed to go in at 9, but they don't want us getting holiday pay and time and a half, so they said we can come in at midnight instead, which actually makes 0 sense because that means I'll be getting overtime next week. So, kind of confused on their math and how they think they're actually saving money. What it is they're being greedy and they don't want to pay us extra, even though they would be paying us extra. So, doesn't really make much sense. A little confused on that one. But, yeah, as far as like Christmas and stuff, me and Sammy, we just gave each other a gift. I actually got The Shining, the board game, which looks cool as hell. But the sad thing is when I got it, I seen on the box it takes 3 players and up. And I'm like, oh man, because I wanted to play it, because it's just me and her that live here. But yeah, so that's kind of a bummer. I gotta wait till I get 3 people. I got her some like fancy looking snow boots. That's what she wanted. But yeah, so I'm not sure if I want to go in tonight or not. It's optional. I don't have to. I'm feeling kind of sleepy now, but I got up at like 2 this afternoon and was just wide awake. So figured I'd do a podcast. But I don't have anything special planned for Christmas as far as podcast. Everything's just been kind of hectic and crazy lately. Working on a podcast t-shirt for my brother. And then I have another one I'm going to make for a friend at work who listens. So he's a fellow tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist. But yeah, I wanted to last episode, or no, not last episode. Yeah, it was last episode. Last episode I put out was a rerun from the old channel. But the episode before that was the actual technically official last episode. I've been having kind of so much crazy stuff go on in my life. I just kind of did an update, but I could have did the whole episode on an update because I wanted to cover the tornadoes that came through. And yeah, let's get into that. But before we get into that, I would like to say thanks for the new subscriber on YouTube. If you're an audio listener only, you can find us on YouTube and YouTube as in UGE tube. And if you're a visual watcher, but you want to listen to us audio only, because some people like to do that to save their battery while they work, because it goes into sleep mode, the screen, you can find us on Breaker, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, Spotify, and Anchor. But yeah, we'll get on with talking about this here tornado, man. So we had a tornado, several of them from what I heard come through. It's like 4 states wide, man. I was listening to InfoWars, getting into some conspiracy here. Apparently CNN had been fear-mongering, which is no surprise. I mean, Operation Mockingbird. Saying that it was the worst tornado spree ever in existence, and it's actually false. It was the second worst. But of course, okay, the whole pandemic is what they got us going on right now. They're like I said before with the Agenda 21. This ties in with Agenda 30. The next big thing is climate change, and they're blaming this tornado stuff on climate change. Now, we already know that they can control weather. That's not even a conspiracy anymore. Like back in like the mid to early 2000s, it was a conspiracy and everyone used to make fun of us conspiracy theorists like, oh, they can control weather with chemtrails or HARP or blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's not a conspiracy anymore. So who's to say that they didn't do this to further the plan of Agenda 21, Agenda 2030? Blame it on climate change. Blame it on too many of us driving around and going out and about. And there's too many of us in general. Call the herd. But figured I'd bring that up. But yeah, I live in Kentucky. I live in Mercer County. And it got pretty crazy here. Like it was like 4:40 a.m. And yeah, not my boss, but my senior was like, "Hey, we might all have to go into the freezer or the walk-in cooler." And I just looked at him. I said, "You can." I said, he's like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "I'm getting in my car and going home. I'm not. I get out of here at 5 a.m. Ain't no way at 4:30 am I gonna sit there and hang out in the cooler with you all waiting it out like that." And I'm not suicidal or nothing, but I don't care to die. Like this reality that we live in, this whole great reset, this whole pandemic, this whole weird shit that they got going on, like I don't care to like leave it behind. I really don't care. I know that sounds negative and that sounds depressing, but I really don't care to just leave it all behind. But yeah, I survived the tornado spree, and apparently it hit up Bowling Green, like I think that's Western Kentucky. Like it hit it hard. So there's fundraisers and stuff online if you guys feel the Christmas spirit and want to donate to the victims and all that. Go for it, man. I mean, you can Google it. I don't have any links or anything, but you can find it in 2 seconds. But Kentucky got hit hard, man, and apparently it was like a quad state, like 4 states that just this huge weird spree. And when you actually look at the path and all that, like it looks controlled. It looks man-made as far as like weather manipulation and weather control. And if you guys still don't believe that, if you're listening and you're like, "Oh, this dude's crazy," like I can do a whole episode on it. I plan on doing it anyways. Weather manipulation, weather control, weather warfare. They were playing around with it during Vietnam, and that's all declassified, and you can look it up. I'm gonna get into it. I might do a whole episode on that. I'll put it on the list because, dude, I keep saying I'm gonna do an episode on this. I'm gonna do an episode on that. It's insane, like the amount of stuff I got, lined up. It's hard to keep up, man. There's only so many hours in the day, and where I work so much, it's like I have a huge, gigantic list of episodes that need to be done. But today we're just gonna do something fun, just because it's Christmas. I don't want to get into something too crazy. I mean, there's your conspiracy there, the weather warfare and what I went through, and I survived. And oh, yeah. No one even asked, "Are you still alive, Abe? You still alive? You okay?" I even didn't even post or nothing. Shows me how much you guys care about me. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But today we're just going to do, we haven't done a paranormal episode in a while, so we'll get into the paranormal. The scent of lilacs on the breeze. And this is Bucharest, Ohio, 1900. Once, in the chilly, seldom-used parlor of a wide-spreading white farmhouse in upper New York State, I saw a picture that has ever since remained in my memory As I write this story, I can still see the quiet color, feel the tender, elusive mood of the painting, its fragility, as though I had just looked at the picture again, but I saw it only once, long ago. In art circles, the picture would have been termed American primitive, more delicately drawn than most primitives. It contained none of the hardness, the still formality of arrangement one finds in some portraits. Big-eyed children clutching dog or doll, flat-faced women who might be any age from 20 to 60, in severe dress with huge breastpin. The treatment was light gossamer. The subject, a rounded young girl, undeniably youthful. In a ruffled white dress and big white hair ribbon bows, she stood in a grove of slender, palely painted saplings. And I remember there was a bow of white blossoms, fruit blossoms, as I recall, that set the mood for May. It was indeed a pastoral, a pastiche, a fragment of the utter innocence found in fleeting youth before the world in its ways have intruded. When I asked who the girl was and who had painted the picture, no one knew. Father bought the picture at the county fair because he liked it, one of the women at the house said. Years later, when I sat in a farmhouse in Ohio, in front of the graying embers of a log fire after an evening of telling tales, my mind went back to the painting of the young country girl in white, poised lightly in a sapling wood. A long time has passed since I had seen the picture, but how immediate it was in my consciousness. While listening to one of the tales, a ghost story about a girl named Ethel Hanley, that had captured and held my imagination by its singularly haunting power, I had thought Ethel might be the girl in the white ruffled dress pulling down a bow of May blossoms. On an afternoon in late May, Frank Burbank, a young surveyor, breasted a hill a few miles outside Bicorus. From the hilltop, he was to look over some fields owned by a farmer named Hanley that were being bought by the State Highway Commission. The day was growing unreasonably hot. Spring had come early that year. Prodigal with flowers, wild and garden, daffodils, tulips, crocuses, long since past blooming, had been replaced by climbing roses, clematis, syringa, big in bud. Lilacs blew in many doorways. Lilacs! Now there was a flower. Frank liked the Persian purples, but for him, nothing in the flower kingdom could equal the white ones, so plume-like and fragrant. When Frank reached the top of the hill, he heard voices and laughter from the direction of the white clapboard house that stood a few yards from the road on his right. Locust trees marched sentinel in front of the house, and a lawn with bushes and a few flower beds lent a pleasant approach. What caught and held his eye, however, was the prettiest girl he had ever seen, standing embowered in a fountain of white lilacs. Now this is not true, thought Frank. Why, lilacs and a girl with corn silk hair in a roughly white dress, her arms full of lilacs. Things just didn't happen this way. Then he saw a man standing a few feet in front of the girl, bent over with a square black cloth over his head. The man raised his hand in a well-known "watch the birdie" gesture. The girl was having her picture taken. Unnoticed, Frank viewed the scene. Beside the girl and the photographer, a woman stood in the doorway watching the proceedings, and a small boy and the girl stared, goggle-eyed, at the feet of the photographer. Then, with considerable satisfaction, the young surveyor saw a wooden sign nailed to one of the trees reading, "Cold buttermilk served." No surveying job with Frank's memory had been so thoroughly pleasant as this one. As he handed his long-range glasses to his helper, Ted Davis, and rolled down his sleeves, Frank nodded to question in Ted's eyes. "You're right. I'm not going down to Bickers with you. I'm going to get my daily glass of buttermilk." Ted smiled. "I didn't know you liked buttermilk so much." "It's an acquired taste," Frank said, laughing. "See you later." "Yes, much later. There's a big moon tonight," Ted said as he looked to the path down the hill. At the Hanleys, Frank drank buttermilk and talked to Ethel's brothers Sammy and Addie, an orphan cousin who lived with the family. And he had downed his second glass. After he had downed his second glass, he stood up hesitantly as if to go. Mrs. Hanley, noticing his reluctance, said, "Sit a while, Frank. Ethel's sure to be along soon. Her father's driving her home. She's run ragged these days with the graduation exercises coming up and her dress not finished yet. What you saw the other day was only tacked together for the photograph. She didn't even have her sash. That's coming by the mail from a big store in Cincinnati, where her cousin Luella Biggs clerks. She's picking it out." A little later, Ethel and her father arrived, and of course Frank was asked to stay for supper. After the meal was over, when Frank and Ethel offered to help Mrs. Hanley with the dishes, she waved them away. "Go on, take your walk, Frank. Don't keep Ethel out long. Remember, she's still a schoolgirl." The two wandered down through the clover meadow and sat on a stone foundation where a hay barn had once stood. Wild budding roses now covered most of the wall. Ethel, breaking a silence of some minutes, said, "When do you expect to finish your job of surveying, Frank? I mean, when will you be leaving Bickers?" Frank reached over and took Ethel's hand. For a moment, he let the hand lie, whitened by moonlight, on his palm. Then he covered it with his other hand caressingly. "I aim to stay in Bucharest, Ethel, as long as you want me to." The girl smiled up at him, and he took her in his arms. Frank went to the graduation exercises and sat with the Hanleys. Ethel, who had earned the place of valedictorian, gave the class oration in her pleasing soft voice, and Frank, entranced, watched her every move. In her white organdy dress, with a wide sash of sky-blue ribbon tied in a bow at the side, she was the loveliest thing he had ever imagined. Earlier that day, as they had been leaving the farm, Frank had cut a spray of white lilacs, almost the last from a big bush beside the front door. Ethel had smiled and tucked it in her sash. Now, sitting in the audience, he could smell the odor of the lilacs plain as could be. Lilacs and Ethel, one who always reminded him of the other. The next day, Frank asked Mr. Hanley for consent to marry Ethel. Farmer Hanley shook his head. "My boy, she's too young to marry you or anyone else. Ethel's only 17. I like you. I'd like you for a son-in-law. You're steady, you're temperate, and you're good-natured. But you and my daughter'll have to wait. Wait 2 years. Ethel's mother was 19 when I married her. It's a good age to start life off together. Are you going to stay in the surveyor's office in Bickers?" Frank was silent with disappointment for a moment. "No," he said finally. "I'm studying to be a civil engineer. If I wait 2 years, Mr. Hanley, will you give your consent?" Mr. Hanley nodded. "Yes, my son, I certainly will." Frank Burbank was 28 when he went to Cincinnati to study engineering. To earn money for his keep, he took a job working on the night shift of a daily newspaper. He was even able to put by a little. In his small boarding house room, on a table close to his bed, stood the framed photograph of the smiling girl with the soft blonde hair. in white with lilacs in her arms. It was the graduation picture. Every night, Frank gazed at Ethel's face and smelled again the scent of lilacs. Meanwhile, Ethel settled into taking charge of the many chores at the farm. Twice a week she wrote to Frank. Oftener than that, he wrote to her. Then 2 years later to the day, he packed his bag and went back to Bucharest, a full-fledged engineer. Ethel met him at the train with the buggy, and after a happy reunion, they started on their way. As they drove up the hill near the Hanley farm, the horse shied a number of times, seemingly at nothing. "You've got a new horse, I see," Frank said. "What's he shying at all the time?" Ethel laughed. "He's a silly, aren't you, Bill? He shies at his own shadow." Frank arrived on a Thursday. After a talk with Mr. Hanley, it was arranged that Frank and Ethel would be married in 2 weeks on her birthday, the 5th of June. The following Sunday, Mr. Hanley drove his wife to church in Greggsville, a small village 3 miles from the farm in the opposite direction of Bucharest. Ethel, Frank, and Sammy stayed home to prepare dinner. Addie was visiting a friend on a neighboring farm. In the afternoon, Ethel asked her father if Bill was too used up for a drive. She wanted to take Frank to see a small house on the Mansfield Road. It was for sale, a nice little place. She had seen it for the first time months ago. "No, Bill's not too tired," her father answered. "That horse beats me. He's 12 years old, and he's as skittish at times as a 2-year-old. But let Frank drive." The day was warm and still. Hardly a breath of air was stirring. Ethel went up to her room under the eaves. She had a surprise for Frank, a new white dress with lots of laced ruffles on the waist. Just the kind of dress he liked her in. She had a new hat, too, pale blue straw, and for fun she pinned a spray of white lilacs among the blue ribbon loops. When she came downstairs in her finery, she was a great success. Frank's eyes shone as he admired her. Proudly he helped her into her buggy, and they set off along the turnpike. With Frank at the reins, apple blossoms were turning brown, and so were lilacs in many dooryards. It had been another long, warm spring, and flowers were early over. Bill seemed on his good behavior, jogging along so quietly that Frank could relax and look at the scenery. They passed the old Spear place, run to ruin now since the Spear boys had chosen to live in Mansfield. The Murdoch place looked neat as a new pin. "Nice place the Murdochs have," Frank said. "One day we'll have one even better." Then he had to pull Bill over to let the rig pass. A girl with fiery red hair and a big green bow on her hat waved to them from the front seat of a fringe-top surrey. "Hello, Ethel," she called. "Hello, Zella. Come over and see me." Ethel turned to Frank. "That's Zella Murdoch, a school friend of mine. You met her, remember, at the graduation dance?" "I saw only one girl at the dance. We should make a wish. First red-haired girl driving a white horse we've seen today. Good luck, you know." Frank laughed and turned his attention to a tall mass of bright red paint on the other side of the road from the Murdoch place. "Farmer Hawks has built a new silo," Ethel told him. And now they were coming to a downgrade. At the bottom of the hill, a stone bridge spanned a reed-choked stream, little more than a brook. Just as Frank started to tighten the reins, a boy riding a bicycle shot out from the side of the road to the right of the highway. Bill shied violently, snorted, reared, and leaped forward, snapping the whippletree. Plunging down the grade, the maddened animal swung the light buggy against a stone parapet, smashing a wheel. Ethel was thrown clear, struck her head on the coping of the bridge, and died immediately. After Ethel's funeral, Frank Burbank left Bucharest. For 3 years he wandered about from city to city. Once he accepted an engineering job in Alaska. Perhaps, thought Frank, if I get far enough away, I can shake the thoughts of that terrible Sunday afternoon from my mind. But 6 months in Nome did not help. It seemed to the harassed young man that never, waking or sleeping, was his mind free from the thought of Ethel, lying crumpled in his arms, stained with blood. One day, Frank sat down at a desk in the Antlers Hotel in Winnipeg and wrote to his old boss, Will Taylor, in Bucharest. Was there an opening in the State Highway Commission office? Anything would do. He did not care. For a while after, Frank returned to Bucharest. He lived quietly, surveying a bit, keeping the office accounts, and on Sundays taking long walks alone in the foothills. One day in October, when the masses of slashing color and sumac, sassafras, and maple were dazzling with brilliance, Frank was hailed as he crossed the highway. A young woman driving a buggy called out, "Hello, aren't you Frank Burbank?" He nodded. "Thought I recognized you," she said. "I'm Zella Murdoch. If you're going to Bucharest, let me give you a lift." "Well, thank you, Miss Murdoch, but I'm going to supper at the Hanleys." "Get in. I'll drive you there." Later that night, after Frank had walked down the hill toward Bucharest, Mrs. Hanley said, "Pa, I'm worried about Frank. Since he came back, he's changed so. Almost never smiles, doesn't seem to hear what a body says to him. Seems always listening or watching for someone. And he did such a funny thing. When I was bidding him good night at the door, he walked over to that lilac bush at the millstone. It's bared as your hand now. He broke off a twig and passed it back and forth under his nose. Then he looked at me as if he didn't see me at all. I could hardly hear him as he turned away. He sort of whispered, 'The smell of lilacs is strong tonight.'" The marriage of Zella Murdoch, who, everybody allowed, would come into plenty when old Jeff Murdoch died, to Frank Burbank, surprised a few of the townspeople of Bucharest or the farmers who lived in the valley and along the Mansfield Road. Zella was a Tartar, the local swains admitted. She got what she wanted. She wanted Frank Burbank, but Zella herself was probably never aware that all she got was the big frame body of Frank to father her children. Never did she capture his heart or share his thoughts. Zella was a busy woman. Her big house ran like oiled machinery. She had plenty of help to look after the 3 children that had came along in as many years. After this spate of maternity, Zella decided to call a halt. 2 boys and a girl were enough. Thereafter, she devoted her life to various clubs and social activities. Once she had roped Frank, and he had performed his duties as consort, Zella left him to his own devices, feeling reasonably sure he would not cause her any anxiety. In the years before the death of Ethel Hanley, the role of husband to a rich wife, even one as attractive as Zella, would never have interested Frank Burbank. At the time, he had ambitions to attain a high place in the world of civil engineering. But the Frank who wandered aimlessly across the hills and valley of the Scotia River had changed greatly since the night in May when he had sat upon rose-hung stone foundation telling a schoolgirl that he loved her. The new Frank was a distracted man who followed a phantom in every sense of the word. One of the first things Frank did on his own after he went to live at Murdoch Farm was to buy white lilac bushes. Some he bought from a nursery maid who cultivated them. Some he bought straight out of farmers' dooryards. And some he took from derelict old places back in the hills, where lone orchards run to rank grass and dead apple trees, and moss-grown hollows of stone told of dwellings long burned away. What on earth you want with so many lilacs I fail to see, Zella scoffed. They keep him amused anyhow, she said, shrugging to a visitor taking tea. One day, Frank went up to the Hanley place to help unload fertilizer. It was March and a chill wind blew about the hilltop. When the work was finished, dusk had laid soft shadows all about, heralding night. As Frank was about to get into his buggy, he thought he saw a woman standing down by the old hay barn foundations. He tied his reins around a pitching post and started down the path. The first intimation of what he would find was almost undiscernible, the scent of lilacs. Unconsciously, he looked back over his shoulder. The big lilac bush was scarcely in bud. Bare and brown spread the branches. Standing in what had once been the door to a byre in the old stone barn was a young girl in a white dress and a white blue hat. She smiled gently at Frank, who paused, stock still, halfway up the path. Then he uttered a cry of terrible loneliness and ran toward the apparition. But in the darkening night, the figure faded away. For a long while, Frank remained leaning against the stone wall. November set in dry and cold. Shooting was exceedingly fine that year. Quail and partridge were plentiful. Frank took his gun and a setter out for a few hours, walking through a dense thicket, half circling the foot of the hill on which the Hanley farm lay. The hunter whistled to his dog. "Come on, sport. Flush 'em." He stopped in mid-command. Coming down the hill, slowly, almost floating, as if her feet need not touch the ground, was a figure of a girl in white. Although myriad branches and twigs cross-hatched the path along which she moved, not one bent in the slightest degree to allow her to pass. The apparition in white passed through the sharp branches as though they were a wall of mist. Sport crouched, every hackle standing, at his master's feet, and emitted short, low whines in the beat of the dry leaves on the path with his forepaw. For a space of minutes the tableau held the hunter, trembling dog, and the woman in luminous white. She stood on the russet path, pierced, as it were, by 100 sapling twigs, and eddying across the field. A light wind carried the scent of May. Frank never knew through the years where or at what time of the day or night he would suddenly encounter the delicate ghost of Ethel Hanley and her aura. He asked Mrs. Hanley in a roundabout way if she had ever been conscious of the presence of her daughter. "Once I thought I saw a girl in white walking down by the old hay barn wall," she said. "But I guess it was a trick of the moonlight." She smiled wistfully. On the night of the 18th birthday of Frank's daughter, Joan, a dinner dance was held in celebration, just before the festivities. Frank came downstairs and found his daughter in apple green silk standing by the bay window in the dining room. "You look very pretty tonight, Joan," Frank said, and he put his arm across her shoulders. After a slight pause, she said, "I want to tell you something, Daddy. I have been sure for the last hour that a woman is walking around out there in the garden, there by the hedge of white lilac. The big ragged bushes you transplanted from those old places in the hills. I thought at first that it was one of the girls from the town playing a trick on me, but when I went out to look, not a soul was in sight. It must be my mother's Scottish ancestors rising in me, you know, 7th daughter of a 7th daughter, born with a caul and all that, but I could have sworn I saw a young girl in a white dress and a big sort of hat floating out there in the lilacs." The doorbell rang and she turned away, her attention diverted to greet her guest. Frank took her place at the window and stood watching until Zella came bustling in to fetch him. After dinner, more guests came and dancing began. Frank saw that Zella, an untiring hostess, was in high fettle, so he slipped out into the soft, mild night. How many May moons he had seen just like this, and how unbearably lonely it always made him feel. For a time he walked about aimlessly. Then he struck off along the little brook that ran past the foot of the hill. About a mile away he could see a light into the Hanley kitchen. Walking on, unthinking, Frank realized he had come to the thick wood of the underbrush and saplings where the hill started to rise. Suddenly he caught his breath, for there, moving with that delicately floating formation he had come to know so well, was the figure in white. Tonight the manner was different. Arms held out at the sides, the white phantom seemed to be moving through the measures of a dance. Frank started forward. Tonight Ethel must not elude him. He could not bear this longing. As he sprang up the hill, the figure floated backward, and he fought the thick tangle of branches in a frenzy. Always the floating girl in white receded further up the hillside. Then she lifted her hand and seemed to toss something onto the leaf mold at his feet. He stooped to pick it up, and when he straightened, the figure was gone. Scarcely believing, Frank looked at what he had received from the ground, a spray of white lilacs, as fresh as it had just been cut.
We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.